Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Pricing Guys. I'm Michael.
And I'm Avy.
And today we got a really interesting topic for you. We're going to talk a little bit about communicating price changes, some stories of what went well, what we've seen a couple of horror stories in the past. But why this kind of came up for us is we saw in the news a little viral video that came out a couple of weeks ago. And it was, and I'm probably butchering this, so I apologize, the Akagi company out of Japan. And they had an ice cream bar, Abby, and they raised the price from 60 to like 70 yen. And this is like the first time in like something crazy, like 20 years that they've taken the price. And what happened was the CEO in the company, they put together a video to apologize to all the customers that they had to take this price increase and it was inevitable. And, they put it on TV, social media, all that stuff. And this video went viral of the company apologizing for having to take its price. Now, interesting because guys from North America, like, what's your thought on that? Apologizing for having to move the price up.
Well, there's somewhat of an authenticity to it in that I think in the video, they not only had the CEO, but they had the entire team there. And they all kind of bowed to the camera. And that even that kind of visual, it gives you the impression that, hey, this company has looked from top to bottom to try to optimize, right? In terms of what they were doing. So I think it came across very heartfelt and genuine. And that's why you just don't generally see that a lot when price increases
Now,
taken.
but like, help me think about that because I think what we hear a lot of time, and like we've even beat the value drum here a bunch. But like what we hear around pricing is like you got to charge for the value. If the value's there, take advantage of the value. What is your thought? Because this kind of goes against value altogether, right? Like it's kind of very counterintuitive to the value equation.
Well, they're not communicating it like that value perspective. I think they more so communicate like anytime we talk about price changes or price adjustments, we always talk there's three kind of key factors that you should be talking to your customer about, and it depends what they're focused on. The first one's fairness. So I think this ad came across from the fairness perspective. I don't know how long it was that they hadn't taken a price adjustment.
It was like something crazy, like it's years and years.
It's been a long time. So from that fairness perspective, I mean, there's no question, right? Everyone else has gone up in price. It's only this company that hasn't.
But you know what? It makes me think if they haven't moved the price in like 20 some odd years, like, man, there must have been a lot of margin in there to begin with, right?
100%. Or the other thing I'd imagine is these bars must have been much bigger. They got a whole lot smaller in that time. And God knows what happened to their ingredients and how they shipped and all those sorts of things, right? I'm sure that they were looking to kind of take value out of the product too. The second is exactly what you said, right? The value equation. And I think from that perspective, it's interesting because I can't believe that their value didn't change over that time in that perspective in terms of what they were delivering to the market, the competitors that they were going up against, that their value positioning didn't change whatsoever, and they could have held that price, that there was no dynamic
But
move.
like, I understand when we're talking about like when we're talking about like big sophisticated purchases and like value changing and like AI and like software product, like, yeah, value can change very rapidly now, but we're like talking about like an ice cream bar. Like essentially, we could say it's closer to a commodity than anything we see. Like, how do you think about that? Because like I can't see there being much movement in that value, right?
I don't know, because I just look at that ice cream aisle and there's so much in there. The space that people are getting differs so quickly, and the amount of items that are on there and how they've got it brand blocked and the types of flavors and the changing of flavor profiles and taste habits. Like we've seen this stuff like the high protein, the low calorie, the vegan, the soy, all this kind of stuff. And as these taste preferences are changing and your consideration sets are changing, price is a lever that you got to pull too, depending on who your customer set is. So that's why, reflecting on this, I think they're kind of remiss if they didn't move price in all that time, or even think about, they're saying 60 to 70. I'd be thinking about, okay, you moved your core pack from 60 to 70, but maybe you should be introducing some other packs, or maybe like, it would be strange if this is the one product you have and it went from 60 to 70.
How do you take, though, like talking about the idea that, okay, maybe there was missed opportunity that happened before. How do you balance the cultural aspect of it? Um, sitting here in North America, very normal that people are taking regular price increases. I'm like, we see it, you've seen it in the grocery store for many years now. A lot of people have those clauses built into contracts and B2B. Very different on the other side of the world. How do you balance that cultural aspect of it, especially for companies who might be kind of pricing in multiple markets?
Well, that's really interesting, because I know as you talk on those cultural aspects, and you were talking about this the other day, that in certain regions of the world, pricing is much more dynamic in that there's much more negotiation involved. And even though you say you're taking your price from this level to this level, well, you're going through channel partners, and then your customers are going to be expected to negotiate it as well. So it's never necessarily a clean view. But I think from that kind of communication that we saw there and how they communicated that price change, I can't even think of a North American example where we've seen someone communicate pricing like that. And actually, company wide take accountability for that, and be, actually putting the price in the ad too. Like, here's what we went from,
Yeah.
and to,
Huge transparency, right?
incredible transparency. And, we've also seen the other thing come up in that, well, maybe the company wasn't as clear as they needed to be on the price adjustments that were happening. And not all your customers are going to see it, but the ones that do see it, they can get very irate, very angry, feel like they've been taken advantage of. That's kind of the other side of the equation.
So you said there were three things. I think you talked about value. You talked about the other one, but what's number three?
Fairness. And the third one was negotiation.
Okay.
So, and we covered that in a roundabout way.
Yeah, fair.
But, when your customers are no longer talking about it,
I guess it's more
or what your value is. Yeah. And they're starting to ask you other things like, hey, can we delay this for another 3 months? Or can I forward buy? Or can you provide me these special accommodations? We're no longer talking about the price adjustment anymore. We're more so talking about, much more talking about like how to negotiate around a price increase. One thing I want to ask you before we run out of time here is, and we've seen it. We've seen clients that have, they're putting together a one pager on what their price change was, and they will go to the absolute decimal on, here's how much butter change, here's how much milk change, and this future is here and that and whatnot. And they'll have kind of a committee writing this. And they will, it's almost, you look at how many hours were put into that letter. And that amount of attention. What are your thoughts on when a customer receives that letter and how they interpret it versus where the organizations have put their energy against?
I think there's a lot of time where people are focused on the cost, and let's make sure that we actually kind of get the cost down and everyone understands the cost. And it's interesting because I see it like in a lot of different industries, like, in the past, spent a lot of time in consumer goods, and like, exactly to your point, everyone's worried about cost change forms and like, I gotta know what percentage of ingredients. But I see it a lot of the time, even in like software technology, everyone's worried about like compute costs and looking at this cost and looking at that cost. And I think a lot of the time there's too much discussion or worry about that cost, where I feel like it's just kind of like bureaucratic paperwork, where they're filling out the paperwork. You kind of give the paperwork, someone kind of signs off on it or says, okay. But the thing is that stuff's really easy to push back on, right? Because it's like I could come to you and I could say like, oh, well, you say this, the market says this. Like, why is it my fault that you didn't hedge this properly? Or like, why is it my fault you didn't negotiate with Amazon better? Um, and that's easy for customers to kind of push back on. But I think if they focused more on that value message about like, here's the change that's happening, here's why it's happening, and here's all this like added value that might be out there, and giving almost like a holistic market view of it, I think that's probably a better approach. But I think we still live in this antiquated world where, we're kind of pencil pushers and trying to justify things that might not necessarily make sense.
I think the most frustrating part for me, and I see this with a lot of executives, they talk about value-based pricing. They talk about the customer. They talk about the consumer. But then when we get to pricing time, then they become these cost-based accountants. And they're talking about what's gone on with copper, what's gone on with this. And it's a total 360 from where we were before, right? So I think that's one piece for me. The other thing that I'd like to leave the viewers with is exactly to your point. We've dealt with a ton of companies who filled out these cost forms. And if you look at how we filled out these cost forms, 2 years ago and how we're putting it to it now, if that company was looking at these two cost forms, they don't make any sense. You can't correlate them at all together.
Well, I think it's looking at the other stuff. Like working in the tech space a lot, like software, right? A lot of like what people look at, and they're focused on like, oh, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this. And I'm like, well, has anyone actually calculated like the stickiness of this? Like, what's the cost of switching? Like we were working with someone and then they're like high big data processing, and it was like used by big banks, like to do actual like transactions, like stock transactions. And like the risk profile and the cost of switching this would be like astronomical. And they weren't even thinking about that. They were kind of, oh, well, the price of this is the compute cost is going from here to here. But they weren't looking at the fact that like, look, for someone to switch out of your solutions, it's going to cost them like tens of millions of dollars, right? Like you have way more power here to be able to drive value than you actually think. So I think it's like reframing what you're actually looking at when you're thinking about that price increase too.
So as we're thinking about price adjustments, I think what we want to leave you with today is you got to get out of the weeds, really think about what strategically you're trying to do, what you want to communicate, and being authentic and owning that message.
So one question I have for you, do you think, now that we've seen this trend in Japan, when do you think the first kind of North American company to come out publicly and apologize for their price increase? Do you think we're going to see in the next year?
I do not think so. My money would not be on that.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see. Maybe it's a marketing thing that someone comes out with, but
well, we'll keep monitoring it, and when we do, we'll be back with another episode. Thanks, everyone.
yeah, see you next time.